Well, welcome. Great turnout. First, let me just say thank you for everyone for joining us today. We have an incredible opportunity before us. Secretary Perdue has come up and is really doing what I think we expect of folks out of Washington, coming up to listen, be part of an active discussion here in New Hampshire, understand what our needs and concerns are in terms of how they relate with his department, brainstorm some ideas, and like I've said all along, this is an administration that follows up with action, and I think that's the best thing we can take out of this is what are the real action items that we're looking for, that we can expect, that hopefully the Secretary can take down with them, and hopefully make sure that this isn't just the one-time event. This is a continuing dialogue. We open up communications. We do things a little differently here in New Hampshire. I think we do it better than everybody else, frankly, to be a little blunt about it. We're small. We're a small state, but that means we can be innovative. We can be nimble. We're a great laboratory to test new ideas. When you're talking about what happens in agriculture, it's not just what happens on the farms, what happens in the Forest Service, it's what happens within recreation, from maple syrup on down to our farm-to-table initiatives here. These are all aspects of our economy and our culture, our lifestyle here in New Hampshire, that I think is important that we bring some of the best and brightest. And I'm looking not just around the room here at the table, and it's great to see everyone here. There's folks in the audience. Kind of the skill sets and the knowledge base that we have in this room is tremendous. So again, it's just a great opportunity to have the Secretary with us, to have Congresswoman Custer, Congresswoman Shea Porter join us as well, and make sure that people the folks down in Washington understand what's really going on the ground here in New Hampshire, and participate in that. So again, welcome everyone, and again, thank you, Secretary Perdue, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Governor. Would our members of Congress like to have a word as we begin?
Thank you. I first would like to say thank you very much for coming to my district. I mentioned earlier I can't recall a Secretary of Agriculture coming to this district, so we are very honored that you're here. And I thank you for the efforts in a fully bipartisan manner. I'd like to thank the Governor for signing on to that letter I sent you. And we now have a commission for the humane treatment of animals. Thank you very much for that, because we know we had a problem in this area. So we work together. And it's important. We may not agree on everything, but I'm very, very grateful, and I think that we can find common ground. We understand our rural heritage. I said I actually had my first date right here, so it was kind of fun to come in just now. But we know what our responsibilities are, and not just to each other and to the farmers and to all of these, but also to protect the environment for the next generation. So I'm certainly hoping that you're listening when we talk about protecting our pollinators so that farmers have wonderful crops and that we can continue to feed our population. So we're honored that you're here, and I thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Perdue, for being with us. Congresswoman Annie Kuster. I'm the first person from New Hampshire, member of Congress, to serve on the Agriculture Committee in the House for 70 years. So it gives you a sense of how far our agriculture policy in this country shifted to the big agribusiness in the Midwest. And we're excited to have you come to New Hampshire because we've got so much innovation going on in agriculture. I'm glad you got a chance to visit LEAF, and I was saying about how we have a new project coming all the way up in Berlin for growing tomatoes and lettuce greens year-round. I've been very excited by the impact of the Rural Development Program from the USDA and projects that we've done all over my district, all over the state. In particular, we got an amendment on the last Farm Bill to use rural development funds for economic development and, in particular, workforce development through the community colleges. And we were very fortunate to get a significant loan from very low interest rate, 1%, for the state of New Hampshire community colleges to expand with a whole new campus over in Lebanon, New Hampshire. So it'll be advanced manufacturing, healthcare, but the USDA has very broad jurisdiction. Also, timber in the North Country, where I represent, we have a lot of jobs in forest products and bioenergy, which is really important. And organic farming is another big growth area for New Hampshire. As we talked earlier, the consumer is leading the charge for healthy food for their families. And I think that's something that we want to work with you to continue to expand. So we're excited about the opportunities in rural America, and we're thrilled that you're here in New Hampshire to hear about some of the innovation. We have our challenges, and we're happy to have several folks with us on the panel that will address the real scourge of the opioid epidemic across rural America. New Hampshire has been very hard hit, as has West Virginia and other states that you're familiar with. We've got some of the best minds in the state about how we're reaching out, education, prevention, access to treatment, and long-term recovery. And I hope you'll get a chance to hear from these folks about what we're doing in our small towns all across New Hampshire to really make a difference. So thanks for being with us. And ag is one of those great issues on Capitol Hill that's bipartisan, very rare, as you can imagine. So I appreciate the governor hosting, and thanks for all that you do.
Well, thank you, Governor, and thank you, members of Congress. We're delighted to be here in Wolfboro, where it certainly appears that town hall democracy is alive and well. Is that not right? So we appreciate you all showing up here, and for certainly our panelists who will give an opportunity to introduce themselves and maybe who they represent very briefly, because we are here for a listening session. Our real incentive for being here, on the day I was sworn in April, I was at the White House, and the president on that very same day signed an executive order, and it included 22 different federal agencies, and its purpose was to understand the needs and challenges of rural prosperity up here. What were the barriers, what were the impediments, and what can the federal government do in working with state partners, members of Congress, local governments, and local NGOs out here, as well as the public at large, to enhance the benefit of rural America. I think we all recognize that even as we've kind of come out of the recession, I don't think rural America has kept pace with employment and technology and opportunities in many of our more urban areas. So that's why we're here. That's why I'm here as the Secretary of Agriculture. And you would think that Secretary of Agriculture would be in other parts. I have been, but I also understand that agriculture is important in every state. And frankly, the USDA has many other types of responsibilities, some of which were mentioned here, over responsibilities of rural development and food safety and those kind of things that impact our overall citizenry. The Rural Prosperity Task Force, we're calling this Back to Our Roots Tour, and we've been in many states, and we were here, we began over in Connecticut. We came through, had a great stop in Massachusetts, stopped earlier down in Manchester and saw a great agroponic production facility there that the Congresswoman mentioned, and new technology. What we're finding here in the Northeast is that, Governor, you have to do more with less. That's less land. And you have to do it in a more densely juxtaposition with urban areas and suburban areas. So that means that we need to cooperate better and learn how to get along. I told the people in Connecticut and in Massachusetts, I really think this may be the future of agriculture everywhere as we have these challenges as we go forward. So that's why we're here. There are three broad goals of, Congresswoman Custer, you kind of mentioned a couple of them, but there are four broad goals in our Rural Prosperity Task Force that we'll talk about and hopefully address here as you hear from our panelists, and you'll understand why we've assembled them to talk about the quality of life issues. One is that quality of life, and then the rural workforce, where they are. You mentioned earlier that people are having to commute long distances because to find jobs. And then we see we saw it earlier this morning, innovation, technology, and data use in agriculture and in rural prosperity. And then certainly you mentioned another one, economic development. And that's very vital as we look at our rural areas and how we can develop them without losing that arable farmland that's so precious, because once it's developed, we've got to have good land policies nationally that preserve those productive areas, and we don't convert them into things that never come back, because at some point in time we'll need that land. So we're delighted for you to be here. It's a listening session, not a speaking session. I'm not going to give a speech any more than as brief as I can about why we're here. If you want to read a speech, I'll write one. You can lay it on the web. But we want to listen to you. We want to hear, certainly from our panelists today. And then if others have things that they'd like to submit, written remarks or comments there, then we've got staff here that will be happy to collect that as well. So thank you for being here. And with that, I'm going to ask Anna here with the Food and Drug Administration to introduce herself, and we'll go around and introduce our panel, and then we'll begin. I want to hear from your ideas, challenges. How can the federal government, specifically the USDA, help to facilitate, improve rural prosperity, rural quality of life, or how can we just get out of your way? So either one of those, and Anna, please begin.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I'm really delighted to be able to join the leaders around the table today. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Policy Planning, Legislation, and Analysis at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and I'm here in particular because we recognize the staggering human toll that the opioid epidemic is taking on communities across our country, particularly rural communities. So I very much look forward to hearing about what you're doing here in these communities and how we can work together to combat the epidemic.
Thank you. Thank you again for being invited to be here. The last time I knew Secretary Perdue was in Georgia, where I was living, and he was the governor at that time. So I'm grateful to be able to be here. My name is Mitch Shetton. I'm the founder and CEO of the White Horse Addiction Center in Center Ossipee, New Hampshire. We started very small, but we're growing very quickly. So I just appreciate the chance to come and be able to talk to you about that.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sharon Beatty with Mid-State Health Center in the middle of New Hampshire, which is not Concord, may I point out. We have a federally qualified health center that we've worked very hard to create. We're creative and innovative and have managed to form partnerships with some of the other colleagues at the table to start to address some opiate issues. One of the best things is I'm a fan of USDA from way back. From the economic development side, and we thank USDA for helping, or for actually in total financing our new building in Bristol, New Hampshire, which serves about 8,000 people in that building, and we've been able to add substance abuse treatment because of our ability to have the space. So just want to voice our appreciation to Congresswoman Custer and to USDA for helping us get that done.
Morning, Secretary. My name is Jeff Hayes. I'm Executive Director of the Lakes Region Planning Commission. We work with 30 towns around the Lakes region on a number of different issues, a lot of infrastructure, land use, economic development issues. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Sue Cagle with UNH Cooperative Extension. We work in communities all around the state on a variety of issues, but a lot of our focus has been on really supporting communities as they work to identify what their needs are, what their strengths are, and what their goals are moving forward, and how do they do that.
Good morning. My name is Deb Narrow, and I'm the Executive Director of CATIE, Communities for Alcohol and Drug-Free Youth, and it's an honor to be here to discuss the opiate solutions. That's our focus. Thank you.
There we go. Good morning. My name is Justin Slattery, and I'm the Executive Director of the Belknap Economic Development Council. We're one of 10 nonprofit regional development corporations in the state, and really honored to be here. And USDA Rural Development's a strong partner of Belknap EDC for many years, and we appreciate that support. And frankly, Belknap EDC is focused on economic development and workforce development initiatives and priorities here in the Lakes region, so we look forward to the discussion.
Good morning. I'm Ann Hazlett, and I'm serving as Assistant to Secretary Perdue for Rural Development. I just want to thank everyone for being here today. I think all of our best learning happens from people like each of you that are working on the ground and in communities, and I'm grateful for your attendance.
Good morning. My name is Larissa Bahia, and I am the president of Lakes Region Community College in Laconia, New Hampshire. We're one of 7 community colleges in the state, and I really appreciate the invitation to be here.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for visiting the great state of New Hampshire. I'm John Muse. I'm the Acting State Director for Vermont and New Hampshire's USDA Rural Development. Rural Development is one mission area under the department that primarily focuses on rural areas for community and economic development. We do that through investments, and we can only invest if you engage us. So please let this conversation continue after today and talk to our staff that are here so that we can continue to invest. And I thank the congressional delegation for giving us the funds to be able to do that. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Dave Owen, the town manager here in Wolfboro, New Hampshire. I want to welcome again the secretary, the governor, our congressmen, our persons, and all of our guests to our town hall, which was just renovated about 3 years ago at a cost of $4 million. It took 3 attempts of going to the taxpayers to get their support for this project, but we finally accomplished it, and I think it was well worth the effort, and I hope you would agree with that.
Well, a beautiful historic facility, and I congratulate you for preserving these kind of buildings that have a history and a tradition, but also, as I saw downstairs, a real functionality for the citizens of Wolfboro. So we're happy to be here. Thank all of you. We've heard some initial comments. Now, I guess we know we have the opioid issue, and several of you are interested in that. I'd just like to start generally, broadly. When we think about quality of life issues in rural areas, what do you think about with quality of life? Why do people want to move to rural? Why do kids want to stay? We see a demographic shift, whether it's lack of broadband access or different types of things, lack of jobs. I'd like to hear from you. What are the impediments from rural prosperity? Why are we here initially anyway thinking there may be a challenge on rural prosperity? And what would you say? And then move around to the different areas that you are specifically interested in. And then let's talk about some of the potential solutions and how we can be partners in that process, from the federal government to the state government to local governments. How we all serve those same citizens. So how can we be collaborative in that way, not working against one another, but how can we flow down? I really came, I guess my first job was in unpaid job. It was an appointed job in planning and zoning. And when the local government officials who appointed me asked me, said, "You don't have any political ambitions, do you?" I said, "No." They said, "Good, with this job you won't need any." And you know how controversial planning and zoning can be. But I found that was a great listening and learning experience of understanding how passionate people were about their personal property, but also about the good of the community. And that's what we want to mesh and reconcile here today. I went on to the state legislature when I did that, and then was a governor in 8 years for Georgia, and understanding how different levels. My frustration governor many times was the federal government, that they came in with a supremacy type of attitude with, here are the solutions, and you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to follow this rule, this regulation. I think we got a different administration now that wants to work collaboratively. This past week, I've met with county commissioners from Ohio. The White House had invited in a group of county commissioners there, knowing that local government knows where the heart and the pulse of the people there and understands that. So they represent the citizens closest, and I think I probably agree that the government closest to the people is the ones that's trusted the most and the one that operates the most effectively. So that's why we're here, trying to figure out how, not from a lording over perspective, but how from a grassroots up, from local to state to federal, can we work together for the betterment of all these people and the people they represent, not only in this area but across the country. So what can we do about quality of life? What's your definition?
Well, I'm not afraid to kick it off here. In 2012, I was living in Georgia, but I grew up in New Hampshire, and I grew in the state. I was working for UPS out of Atlanta. Might know about those guys. Yeah. But I was drawn back to New Hampshire. I have roots here. My family's here. I moved away originally because there wasn't a lot of work here outside of a tourism type of industry. And that's what originally took me away in the 70s, and I moved all over the country. In that movement, I went to work for an organization called No Longer Bound as a volunteer, and I learned about the addiction issue. So as I came near the end of my career, I had the chance to retire early and come back to the state that I love so much. It's beautiful here. Everything about it is incredible. But what I learned was that with this crisis that we have, the addiction issues and things, they needed help. And through my training at UPS, I felt, hey, I can do something about this. So we came back and opened up this White Horse, and we can talk more about what we do and how we do it later. I think the biggest thing that I've seen since I've been here with the people that come in and see us, in some respects because of the geographics of where we are, we have a lot of people spread out over a wide area of the county. It can make it difficult to get to jobs, to get and find places to go to work, or if they need treatment for something, to go get it. It's a challenge. I have a challenge just finding a doctor, a primary care doctor up here compared to when I was in Georgia. You know, it's a big difference. So what these people need and what we've found is the real answer to a lot of these problems is to provide transportation and get them to where they need to go and to a place to go. And that place needs to involve the entire community. It's not just a White Horse. It's not just the political side of the government. It takes all of us. And that's what it is that we do there. So what we've been able to do is pull together a community of people that have begun to make a difference. And I'll stop and let it go, but this is an incredible state, and we have a lot to offer. And everybody keeps saying we've lost the war on drugs, we have a crisis. You know what, we do, but we have answers, and we can beat this thing. We haven't lost the war. We might have lost a battle, but we're here and ready to go.
Thank you, Mitch, for getting us kicked off there, and I think you've identified the fact that we used to think of the drug war being an urban-centered issue, inner cities. And now what we see with the opiates is that it's really a lot of centered in rural areas, some despair and some issues there economically that drive people to that, but also a lot of complex other issues. So let's move to others who would like to speak up.
Well, I can tag on to what Mitch said. One of the issues in rural America now is certainly the shortage of primary care physicians and our ability to recruit those. One of the things that has helped us best in recruiting is the loan reimbursement program through the National Health Service Corps. And that, you know, funding for that to us is really important. And the state also has provided some funding for loan reimbursement for healthcare professionals, which turns out to be a big deal. Part of development in any rural community is being sure there's adequate access to health care. I obviously have a bias about that, but it's important to any economic development program to be sure that health care works in that community and that it's collaborative and that it works with its partners from afar. It's kind of like the seed corn thing. For some things, you have to go to the next town to get seed corn. You may have to go to the next town to get specialty orthopedics or some other specialty care, but somehow there needs to be a network that makes that work. We do that pretty well in New Hampshire, but recruiting primary care physicians right now, which is going to be the basis for the way healthcare is going to be reimbursed in the future, is exceedingly difficult. So helping us get facilities that make a better place for them to work is a big deal, and I know USDA has done a lot of that. So the facilities, the workforce development, but rural America's social determinants are not quite as nice as some of the cities. So we have to continue to work on that, and certainly that supports helping the opiate issues that we have.
Yes, but Mitch was in a major metropolitan area, and he moved back, so there's some attractions there as well, right?
Well, you know, my accent isn't far from yours, and I catch a lot of grief about that around here, but I try to hide it and it just doesn't help. But sometimes if you talk this way, people in New Hampshire feel sorry for you, so you get your stuff.
I understand.
I was just going to add, I think you raised an important point, and putting on my larger HHS hat here, I would point out it's not just recruitment, but also retention.
Yes.
So.
Which is one reason that facilities become so important. The ability for them to get housing is important. The ability for their spouses to find jobs is a huge, huge issue to recruit into a rural area.
Well, that's a good point, and that's really where the local population, local government really comes in as far as retention. I mean, we can kind of pay people to go initially or resolve their school loans or those kind of things in that area, but then it's kind of the local government, whether it's the educational system, whether it's their spouse's employment, or whether it's housing. There are many of other community-type based things that need to happen there. It's not just a great facility in which to practice, but it's also community-wide acceptance, just general hospitality issues and caring for them. We've got to recognize that medical professionals can go to the Atlantas, they can go to the Bostons, they can go to the New York City, but there's a pastoral life out here in Wolfboro and communities all across the country like that have a pretty good quality of life if we just show it to them.
I agree. And, you know, it takes a village to raise a child, has been said. It takes a village to keep a physician as well.
My point, yes.
Exactly.
I was just going to jump in because I think along the same lines, what we hear and what I see in communities all around New Hampshire.
Could you bring your mic closer a little bit there?
One of the things that we see and hear in communities around New Hampshire is really an understanding of the complexity that I think people were starting to talk about here at the table, that all of these issues exist in community in a very interconnected way. So the opioid crisis is critical, and communities are dealing with how do we bring in workforce and how do we keep workforce. That tends to touch on issues like, do we have quality childcare centers? Do we have good education? Hiking trails and the natural resources in the community. And so what happens is this sort of ripple effect or spider web of, we're talking about one issue, but in a small community, that one issue that a community is dealing with is connected to every other aspect of the community. So bringing people together and figuring out how to do that in a way that is collaborative is one of the challenges, but also I think one of the strengths of New Hampshire that people have worked very hard on. So there's not one quality of life issue, but it's how do we keep people from young children and teens and young adults going into the workforce to young families to retirees that communities want to keep because they bring a wealth of knowledge. It's across the board.
I'd like to echo on that. We had just visited the child care facility, Lakes Region Child Care, and the executive director told us a story about a family that's moving here on a bus that's homeless, and they're coming to live with some relatives. So the quality of life in New Hampshire, people that live here, they're coming here, and there was exactly that, affordable child care. So they're going to be able to hopefully, and they have a big waiting list in that child care facility, and they're going to be able to hopefully accommodate that family. They're going to live with friends, and then they're going to have to find housing, and I think housing is one of the bigger challenges in the state. The housing stock is limited, and it's far and few between of new construction going on. However, you know, so in housing is, as our program director says, that's where the workforce goes to bed at night, and it's primarily to that you're right. It's all interconnected between good services and good housing and good programs. And again, I don't have any solutions on that. However, I would love to work on those issues with the people in the room on how we can invest, because as you know, Secretary, our department division has the tools to be able to do that, but we need the leadership. We need you to step up and say, I want to invest and do that, and then we'll work with you.
I'll just give you one example on housing with USDA-RD that was very, very successful. We got a project over in Lebanon, New Hampshire that was coming to the end of the line for the HUD program that had set it up, low-income housing in a relatively rural community. And it would have been in the interests of the owner to have turned that over, put in a few granite countertops and gotten twice the rent. This happens to be a part of the state that's booming and big healthcare and a university, and it's expensive. And through USDA, we were able to get the funding for a nonprofit organization that specializes in access to housing for low-income families to get another one of these loans, again, very low interest rate, They purchased the facility. They went in and renovated, probably not the granite countertops, but cleaned up the community, the units, and people were so grateful. I remember doing a listening session like this, and a woman was in tears in my arms saying, I know I can live in my car in the Walmart parking lot because that's what I did before I came to this, but I was hoping I wouldn't go back to it. And so we saved those units, 100 units in Lebanon, New Hampshire through USDA RD. And it's something for communities all across the country. We've got legislation for, and we're working with the USDA because these HUD projects are going to come to the end of the line of their 40-year loan, and you're going to have more and more of these across the country that need to roll over.
Yes, Mr. Secretary. From a municipal government perspective, we're all about maintaining and replacing our infrastructure. Water, sewer, streets, the usual suspects. The water system here in the town of Wolfboro was started in the 1890s, same time they built this building, the 1890s. We still have some water mains in a few sections from the 1890s in this town. Most of it is later, from the 30s, 40s, and then there was another building period during the 60s and 70s. So we just did a asset management plan for our water system, which the state helped fund through a grant. And it's going to cost, according to that asset management plan, $100 million. It's $1 million a year over 100 years to replace all the water infrastructure just in this little town of Wolfboro, New Hampshire. And you got hundreds, thousands of small towns all over America that are going to be facing the same challenges as far as replacing their infrastructure. So I think it's really essential that the funding for rural development programs be maintained to assist the rural communities. Also, you mentioned broadband, and as you know, you no longer have to live somewhere to work there. We have a gentleman here in Wolfboro who moved here from Los Angeles. He still works in Hollywood. He has a special effects studio in his home. He just finished the latest season of the Game of Thrones from his studio here in Wolfboro, New Hampshire. He telecommutes to work in Hollywood, in fact. You can do that. A lot of people are doing that. But you can only do it if you have the broadband infrastructure. And we still have neighborhoods in this town, rural, isolated neighborhoods, have no internet access in this day and age. And it's hard to believe. I've gone to third world countries and toured, and some of them have more rural broadband access than we have in our rural communities. So it's definitely an area that needs to be addressed.
Very good point. You mentioned water systems from the 1890s. Obviously, maintaining those and enhancing those is a big part of what rural development does in USDA, along with a revolving fund out of EPA as well. But modernizing those, but the 21st century needs from a transformative standpoint is exactly what you ended with, the broadband capabilities. If we're going to keep people in rural areas, there's got to be modern connectivity. You even look at the type of precision farming like we saw at LEAF today. They can't do that without being on the internet with adequate speeds that allow them to market, to do precision agriculture, and both from education, from healthcare access, telemedicine, to many other types of entrepreneurial type businesses, just as you mentioned with the long distance film person there to do that. There are many other people who would love to start home-based businesses. We were in China. Alibaba would love to have small producers of U.S. products there that they can put on their website that Chinese would love. And this logistics situation we've developed. So you go from 1890 water to 21st century broadband. There are a lot of challenges, but these are critical areas to think about.
If I may, Mr. Secretary, you know, one thing that I think people, I'm learning as governor is how New Hampshire is perceived in Washington in terms of rural versus urban is very different department by department. There is a universal service fund that we all pay into to help expand broadband in rural areas. Yet New Hampshire only gets 44% back for every dollar we send down. Why? Because of our proximity in southern New Hampshire to Boston. We are clearly a rural state, yet we are not being treated as such. This is an FCC issue, not an agricultural issue, but one thing to remember and why it's so important that we all have a voice here is to remind people what the true dynamics of New Hampshire are versus the Washington perception. And it can vary department to department, so making sure we are, to be blunt about it, treated as the rural state that we are, so that we have certain dollars are allocated for rural areas, or looking at remapping what is rural and what is urban, and not just looking at it from a 30,000-foot granularity that doesn't give you the precision that we need to making sure that our programs are emphasized as they need be. So.
I agree with the governor. There's also an issue here that we haven't brought up, which is that we are an aging state. And so we have a lot of retirees who come here, and a lot of our young people have left. So we're one of the older states, and so we have extra challenges there. And one of our challenges now, and it ties into broadband and housing and jobs, is to keep the next generation in place. And we have programs, you know, stay, work, play, and try to get young people to stay here. But we also have extremely high cost of education. Our state university is underfunded. We are always either the highest or the second highest for education for the school debt when the young people leave college. And so that's very discouraging for them. They look for less expensive schools, they leave, and they don't come back. So I think that's not unique in the sense that if you are an older state in other areas, you have that challenge, but it is a challenge for us. So looking at broadband and looking at services to keep people here. I know about the physician one. I just heard about it yesterday, as a matter of fact. So, but I wanted to say one thing about our strength, so that you get a sense of who we are as Granite Staters. And I love the fact that we are Granite Staters. There's a house that takes care of young women who are pregnant or have had babies and are struggling with substance use disorders. It's called Lydia's House of Hope. And if you go in this beautiful old home, you see the partnership and the caring of the private community, private business industry, along with public. This was started up by this woman in a group privately, and every room in that place looks like a designer showcase room. So they didn't just like throw in any kind of furniture, you know, here, this will be good enough for the baby, this will be okay. They made it look beautiful, and they made it look like home. And when I toured, I was so proud to see that New Hampshire had opened up their hearts and had just gone in there and done everything that needed to be done. Anybody would want to live in that place. It was so beautiful. So we have those strengths in our character, in our caring, and our concern about each other. So, you know, that's what makes us, I think, the greatest state to live in. But we do have some strengths in being, you couldn't do that, say, in Manhattan. You couldn't even find the land to do that. So being in a rural area has allowed us to be innovative and has forced us to be more creative, maybe.
I have a quick comment on the housing, just to come back to it. And I also invite all of you to come see Whitehorse if you want to talk about feeling family when you come there. We're a Christian faith-based organization, and we have some things that we struggle with. For the last year, we've been trying to get a campus built. That campus, when it is done, will house 80 beds that will take care of housing for 80 people for long-term staying there. It'll also give them a chance to learn trades and education and other things. We also have another location of 40 more beds for a total of 120 that we've been trying to start. One of the things we run up against is trying to get the grant funding and the funding needed to kick those off. We're told that we've applied for grants, have been told that we haven't been a business long enough, yet we have one of the best staffs in the state. We have 17 people that work there. We have MLADACs, LADACs, CRSWs. We have Suzanne Thistle, who's our executive director, who's one of the top people in the state. She's on your council, who work for us. So we're ready to go. We can run this thing, we can get it up. But we just need the startup. We don't even need all of it. We just need to get the startup. But when you go for the grants, we're told because we're Christian we can't get it. We're told because have been going long enough we can't get it. I keep hearing we can't. Somewhere along the line, we can give you 120 beds. We can give you a place for people to stay. We can give you treatment. We can give you recovery. We can give you education. We can give all that to you if someone would just believe in us long enough to look past all these other things and come out and help get us started. So when you talk about housing in this state, 120 beds is a big deal. We have a massive shortage of beds right now. And 120 is probably close to 30% of what we have right now.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to follow up. One of the strengths in New Hampshire is that we taken a collaborative approach. And with the addiction crisis, it's really like pushing a boulder uphill. And we have to have that top-down, bottom-up approach, which we do. We have a governor that believes in prevention, treatment, and recovery, and our federal delegation, they are lifting us up from up above, and while all of the rest of us are down below pushing mightily against this problem. One of the issues is we really have to look at the whole continuum of care, prevention, treatment, and recovery. And with prevention, it's been undervalued for many years and underfunded. The Federal Drug-Free Community Program through SAMHSA is a wonderful example of how federal monies are put on the ground for local solutions to local problems. And I think we have to keep in mind, oftentimes we take a whack-a-mole approach to prevention, and all eyes right now are on the opiate crisis, as they should be. It's one of the biggest crises of our day, stealing the lives of so many young people. We're going to become an even more aging population, as Congresswoman Shea Porter just said, if we don't solve this problem. We can do that with prevention. Governor Sununu attended and spoke at our prevention summit. We had over 200 people there. And your remarks really stay with me. He said, prevention, he said, substance use is not inevitable, it's preventable. It's true. We have to put money on the ground for that. And so if we understand that any substance use is a risk multiplier towards opiate use, which it is, the CDC, you have a packet of data in front of you that confirms this. We're going to start earlier. We're seeing kids as young as 9 years old in our region, in our diversion programs, that are using. It's a generational issue. So we have to get in there earlier, and we have to reach down, and we also have to look higher towards the college-age populations, which New Hampshire is now looking at the young adults as well, because that's the population that we're losing. So if we can bring some federal monies through the federal drug-free program to the state of New Hampshire, my organization was a 10-year grantee. We have some of the lowest risk indicators of youth in the state of New Hampshire, if not the country. It's because we're using a model which is based on, with Sharon Beatty as one of our leaders, as a public health model. We have to take that approach. And, I thank the governor and Congresswoman Custer, as well as Porter and our senators, for getting behind this. But we do need the help of the federal government to put money on the ground, because prevention works, but it's not free. Thank you.
One of the themes that we also know, and we talk about quality of life issues, has to do with education, both K through 12, and workforce education. So let's hear from our community college representative, who's in that business of helping people become qualified and competent for jobs.
Thank you for the segue. One of the things that I'd like to share is concur with the conversation about prevention, but also about collaboration. I think it is very important for us to see the challenges we have in front of us as having multiple root causes, and that we're really addressing what those root causes are. We're talking about poverty, we're talking about despair in many cases, we're talking about individuals who may not have had access to the mentoring and to the leadership that some of us would like our young people to have as they come through K through 12 system and into our higher ed systems. And so we really need to look at those families and how those families get to the point where they are to understand what the challenges are. With respect to our population, I would say that one of the biggest challenges for our higher ed education system is that our graduating student population is still going to continue to decline through 2020, and so we see less students graduating in the state of New Hampshire, and on top of that, we see students who continue to leave for other states. So what that means for our workforce is that we are less able to prepare the workforce simply because the numbers are less. And so particularly in rural communities, and I would say that Laconia is certainly a case in point of that, we're in a place where we constantly hear employers talking about the demand and their needs for qualified employees. And unfortunately, we're not able to sustain their need simply because we do not have a volume of students coming through our systems. We believe that our institutions are in a place to respond quickly and look towards stackable credentials so that we're not just offering individuals 2-year degrees or 4-year degrees, but truly certificates and credentials that can get them into the workforce quickly. But we do have a problem of students that are either departing our state or are simply not in the place where they can have access to higher education. And that does have to do with our funding and our streams that allow us to provide those opportunities.
I know it's a complex system, and we're talking about rural prosperity. We're talking about a demographic change of a younger generation maybe leaving that, the urbanization. How would you diagnose that? What are some of those root causes that you see? Is it lack of opportunity, lack of jobs, or what do you see?
I wouldn't say that there's a lack of jobs. I think jobs are there. I think that in many cases our young people who know that they are college bound early on make choices to leave the state in some cases, and that is in part because there is always a lure of something different and experiencing college in a different place, and I certainly had that situation myself, so I can't judge students for wanting to do that. I think we see some of those students returning to New Hampshire because of the quality of life once they're at a different point in their life, right? So we see individuals moving back with young children because they're looking for a perhaps less urban environment to raise their children. And so I think we have opportunities there, but those students who are left behind because perhaps they don't necessarily think that they're college bound initially are the students that we see with most challenges, even when they get to our doors. And what I'm trying to refer to are students who may want to go to college and may even take advantage of the opportunities that are there for them, but struggle with day-to-day issues like childcare, struggle with transportation, struggle with food insecurity. And those are our day-to-day challenges that we see in our community colleges.
So if I can tag on to Larissa, whom I haven't met, by the way. Hello. The tuition in New Hampshire for a four-year university, the in-state tuition, is actually higher than out-of-state tuition in other states. So we see a great many of our young adults leave the state to get their education, and we all know what happens when you do that. They live in those communities and wind up staying there. It's a difficult situation at best, certainly, but the tuition cost and the debt load for students graduating from universities in the state of New Hampshire is significant. It is everywhere, I realize that, but I do think in New Hampshire the debt load and the debt burden is higher.
$36,000 on average. We're #1 in the country for.
And that's undergrad. So when you look at, I get so wound up in healthcare, don't I? But physicians coming out, their average debt load now is something around $230,000 to $250,000. So they've just purchased a house, except they have no home. The debt load is huge. But I think the reason a lot of our brightest stars are leaving the state is to get their education because they find better price. So.
Yes?
Secretary, I was just going to say, that, I think we're talking about lifting people up here and providing opportunity, and I just want to echo again the whole infrastructure idea. I think what makes a rural community prosperous is having a working landscape. And I think we have a real challenge in this state in utilizing our, keeping our crop fields in production and utilizing wood fiber is a major issue for this state. So I think a lot of what rural development does in terms of housing and broadband and value-added production hits the mark on what we need there. But I think infrastructure is huge, and these aging water systems are, that's kind of the basis. I mean, we have people and we have infrastructure and we need capital, and those are the the building blocks of the economy, and I think those are the true building blocks. I wanted to throw out one other thing while I had the mic in front of me that should be sort of a simple thing to deal with on I would say a burdensome regulation. We have scenic byway tourism is big in the state of New Hampshire, and we have scenic byways, federally designated scenic byways. And for many good reasons, there's regulations against allowing a signage on these byways. But in so many cases, there's agricultural exemptions, but in this case, there isn't. So there was actually even a local case where there was a farm who wanted to put up a small sign for a farm stand, which is very consistent with a scenic byway, part of the culture, part of the very important income to an agricultural operation because of the tourism. But they couldn't do that because there's no signage on a byway. Right. So I would think it would be a great reform to be able to provide some kind of an agricultural exemption to the scenic byway. And I know that's through the Department of Transportation, Federal Highways, but I think there's an opportunity there to do a common sense reform that would actually enhance the character of that scenic byway.
That's an interesting impediment. I appreciate you bringing it to our attention. We've got people recording these kind of ideas, and maybe that's something we can explore with Secretary Chao about what are those reasons, and with Congress over what are those preclusions that would make. We would probably have to have some sort of constraint around what they could be. You don't want to go around a scenic road or curve and see a big billboard staring you in the face, but a nice little farm stand. Yeah, that's right.
Turn right.
But to re-emphasize that point, agritourism has the potential to be the next real big thing here. I mean, we touch upon the edges of it here, but when you look at what you can do on a simple small farm, whether it's weddings or events, this is where we're going in the 21st century. This is the charm that people want, and this is what we can offer that other states simply can't. And so, again, making sure that we're breaking down some of those barriers at the state level, promoting it at the local level, and having, whether it's the signage and the promotion. You can have the best widget in the world, but if you don't tell people you have it, if you're not promoting it, right? I mean, and this all also goes back to driving workforce. We have incredible quality of life here. We have incredible opportunity here. We have incredible jobs here. But you got to go promote it. You got to go let people know what's going on. And you got to think in a kind of a 21st century manner, right? Don't tell the millennials what you have. Give them what they want, right? And there's a big difference there in terms of where we go, how we do housing, how we build housing, right? What we're going to promote as part of tourism. Don't promote just what we have. Find out what they want. Create those niches. We can be nimble in those aspects. And to your point, I think, go promote, open it up, let people know we're there.
And I think along with that, the most prosperous, thriving rural communities I see don't worry about what they don't have. They take advantage of what they do have. And I tell people oftentimes, young people as well, the best little, most quality acorn can never be a pine tree. So you have to take what you have in New Hampshire and take advantage of that. There are people who want that, coming out of Boston and other things. You mentioned lumber and timber, and that's a great resource that you've got here in your state. I'm going up to the White National Forest after we leave here and install our new chief forester, and his goal and his charge is to get our United States forests, U.S. forests, working again, providing economic opportunity in our communities, and growing healthy forests, managed forests are good for recreation, they're good for wildlife, they're good for economic activity. So I've got to get my members of Congress here. This is my little speech to them. We got to get our fire funding corrected. We're spending 55% of our budget now fighting fires rather than preventing fires, as we should be. And it's certainly a Western issue. But if you go back to the early 1900s, there were huge, major fires here in the Northeast of U.S. forest land. So I don't think it can't happen here as well. And in our dense environment, it could be much worse here.
So you've got my support on the fire, and in particular, there was an example right here in New Hampshire. What was happening was the rest of the timber and forest budget was being sort of shifted to fighting fires in the West. We have a little teeny town called Milan, New Hampshire, and they had a wonderful local community project around their community forest. And they'd gotten the grant, but the money got pulled because of the forest fires out west. Luckily, we were able to get that grant back, and they're thrilled with that, but I'm happy to work with you. Just in terms of thinking big for your commission, back to the issue about broadband, if we could approach that the way we approach the rural electrification with a commitment to bringing broadband all across this country to rural communities, I think it would go a long way to addressing many of these issues, because what you have here is an innovative spirit, an entrepreneurial spirit. But I've talked to realtors in Peterborough, New Hampshire, we don't think of it as rural, but it's not far from, honestly, Boston, and it's in the South. But realtors who have $300,000 and $400,000 homes that they cannot sell because there's no internet access. And going up north, the same. But again, we use the rural development funding in Coos County, the northernmost county, and they did put up the towers, and now they're going to have high-speed broadband communication. So I'd love to work with you in this next Farm Bill, and it ties in as well to veterans. I serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and we just had a hearing with my colleague, General Bergman, out in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. And very similar situation, rural community. We're talking about telehealth and how we can expand access for veterans. You can even do mental health, PTSD, TBI treatment through telehealth. But you can't do it if you don't have access to the broadband. So if we could pull this all together, work in our next Farm Bill, and work with, you have 22 agencies to come together under your umbrella here of the task force, and think big with a rural electrification, but a rural connection across this country. I think it'd be a really big idea.
We would love to work with Congress over a moonshot, because I believe it is absolutely transformative for all the reasons that you said. We are working with our FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, a Kansas farm boy who understands those kind of challenges. I believe, I don't think there's a silver bullet over this issue, but if there's one, I think broadband kind of comes close to a silver bullet of resolving a lot of the issues that we're talking around here.
And I would say we're at a critical turning point, because if we do not do that for our rural communities, this divide in our country and this divide between generations and between rural communities and urban communities will become just a chasm. It will be insurmountable. And, those of us who have raised families here in New Hampshire, I'm certainly hoping to get my boys back from like many people, I was raised here. I went away for my education and came back. But we will never get them back without broadband communication. We're just dreaming if we think that people are going to commit to this.
Like our 14 grandchildren, the power can go out, no big deal. We're charged up. The water can go out, or it'll come back. The power, everything can go out. But if broadband goes out, that's a crisis, There you
go. I do want to be respectful of the Secretary's time. This has been a fantastic discussion. I think Deb, maybe if you want to kind of close this out a little bit, and then we'll let the Secretary have a few closing words.
Thank you, Governor. I just returned last night from a conference in Utah, and there was a Navy SEAL retired commander that spoke, and he was speaking on leadership. And so after the conference, I spoke with him, and I said, if you were going to find a solution to the addiction crisis that America is facing right now, what would it be? Because, I mean, the man's such a problem solver. And so he thought for a moment. He goes, well, you know, alcoholism runs in my family. He says, I've never drank alcohol because I realized the risks. So he goes, raise awareness. And he said, number two, he said that build character and skills in kids. It starts with the kids, with the youth. And those are two things that our organization in New Hampshire does well, with the exception of rural isolation, which is a major risk factor for our youth because of transportation, lack of transportation. I can't tell you how many forums and roundtables that I've participated in over the years, and that's always the #1 issue. And I'm just wondering, are you hearing this from other regions across the country? And if so, what are the solutions? Because we can't seem to find one. And those kids are the ones that are at higher risk for substance use and other issues throughout their lifespan.
I don't want to continue to go back to broadband, but I think that has an opportunity is there as well in connectivity. If you can't be there in person from an educational perspective, there are a lot of online courses out there. We can raise that. Obviously, transportation will be with us. That's not necessarily in our lane, but we're going to see an infrastructure program hopefully come out of Congress this year that will enable us in rural infrastructure. The President's committed that rural USDA would be able to handle 25% of that, moving mostly to governors in a way that we could identify from a bottom-up perspective what those highest needs are. So I want just our staff for a second, if you haven't had a chance to get your point across or in the audience and you got something written down and want to slip a note or a card and want to contact, Ann, raise your hand again. Ann is our rural development leader in USDA. Very integral in that. We've got a local person, John Muse here, who's in that space, and we've got other staff members around the table, around the world, around the room. Raise your hand quickly now. Don't try to hide from me, but if you'll raise your hand there, we got other USDA staff out here. So thank you. Let them know, and they'll pass along to us what we need to be doing. But I want to thank all of you for coming today. It's been very helpful and beneficial to us. We appreciate your participation. And for those of you who didn't get a chance to speak, I know that you've probably got some things we need to hear about as well. So I hope you'll communicate with us and do that. Governor, thank you. Congresswoman Custer and Congresswoman Shea Porter, thank you for joining us here today. Again, it takes all of us. Local government's the foundation, state government, and certainly the federal government working together. So thank you very much.